Hello, can everyone hear me?
Can hear
Yes,
you.
we can.
Good morning.
Good morning, Bill and Bill.
I'm wondering if I don't know what it means on a panelist thing, because we have two other actuaries joining. I'm not sure if they've been, how you've let them in.
I did send invitations to several people who
Okay,
were not regular participants, so hopefully I got the right folks.
yeah, I think they were on the invite list, so they should show up here in a second.
And the meeting is now live on our streaming services. And Ashley, I've clicked a couple times on promote you to panelist. See, you've got your hand raised, but you'll need to confirm that. There we go.
Thank you. You got it that time.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I guess the point of this meeting is that markets need to keep going up for a retirement plan to look good.
Yeah, really.
It was a good year to be an actuary. I might retire this year just because this is the best news we'll ever share with all of us.
Right. Yeah, you guys need to quit while you're ahead. Just get out of the business now, right?
Exactly.
You guys have done a great job, I will say, making this look great.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we're not the ones managing the money, but we'll take credit wherever we can get it. We usually get blasted.
it's all us.
Right.
For the markets, it's all us.
When things go well, you guys can take the blame, and when things go bad, we'll blame you guys as well.
We've been blamed a lot over the last 10 years.
Luckily, it's been pretty good news for the past 10 years.
I just saw Jason's note. I don't know who else might want to start this meeting, but unless we just want to wait for him.
See if he has audio once he starts.
Is he, wait, he's gonna be late? I'm sorry, I'm just pulling.
Give him a minute.
He was here, but he didn't have audio, so he was going to restart.
Oh, okay.
Zoom is telling us we have two William Dowds, but you look distinctly different.
I don't see that, but
I think it's one of your teammates is on and they used your link.
Dimitri is.
Oh, yeah, it's probably Dimitri.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's Dimitri. Okay.
yeah, he's the one with the tie.
He's looking sharp, Bill. Watch out.
Yeah, that's Dimitri Sherman.
Thought it might be a family business, you know. William Dowd 1 and William Dowd 2.
My children they've spurned the actuarial profession.
Good for
Can you give me
them.
Dimitri's last name for the minutes?
Excuse me?
Can I get Dimitri's last name for the minutes?
It's Sherman,
SHERMAN?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
I'm happy just to get the meeting started. If Jason looks like he has might even want to, we can get through this, the welcome and approval of minutes. Any objection to that?
Nope.
Well, welcome, everyone. Good morning.
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 Sorry, I'm in my coat still. My office is freezing and I just got back from my carpool run, so apologies. So we have the minutes that were shared. Is there a motion to approve the minutes or any questions?
Move approval.
Or a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor, either audio or raise your hand. Say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, my
Anyone-
video isn't working.
Anyone opposed? All right, that passes. And I guess we can go ahead and let you guys get started on the actual report.
Okay. I mean, I think I can share my screen so everybody can see. Everybody has a copy of this, but let's just see what happens here. Can y'all see that?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, well, we've got myself, Bill Reed, and then Dan Homan and Dimitri Sherman on the line. Bill and I'll handle the pension part of this, and then I'll turn it over to Dan and Dimitri to handle the OPEB part of it. You know, obviously, everybody's seen the results, at least, even if you just glance at this, you know, the year ending June 30, 21 was a kind of ridiculous year for investments, and everything just went right. You had to almost be asleep at the switch to not have a really good year. So on the pension fund, the return on the assets is 28.7%, okay, which makes everything look fabulous from a funding perspective for purposes of financial statement disclosures and reporting. Of course, one of the things we do when we establish contribution rates for the city to avoid huge fluctuations in what the budget numbers will be as far as cash contributions is we actually smooth investment gains and losses over a 4-year period. So we don't recognize all of that 28.7% in the first year, but we smooth it over that year and 3 other years. But even doing that, the return on that value was 13.3%, which is also a gain. So that will, you know, both of those are significantly higher than the 7.5% assumption. Of course, yes, this is our 3rd June 30 valuation we've delivered to public plans in Virginia. And, you know, just caution is don't get too giddy about this. It's a great year. It looks good. But as we all know, if you all been around as long as I have, there are years when things go way up and there are years when they go way down. So hopefully we'll avoid the downs anytime soon. But, you know, again, at this point, this year, things look good. It flows directly through to the net pension liability that's used for the city's financial statements for GASB reporting. And that decreased from 91 million to 63 million. And pretty much most all of that is the investment performance. So that's a big change. And it also improves the funded ratio from 56.8% up to 70.5%. And because those are both mark to market, you know, and as the assets go up, the funded ratio goes up. The liabilities are fairly predictable. The population doesn't change that much, and we'll show you the stats on that. But again, you know, for financial reporting, which won't show up, it'll show up in next year's financial statements, not this year's. Funded status improved significantly. And then the actuarially determined contribution rate for the year ending 23 is down from 26.36% to 24.85% of payroll. And again, you know, had you used the actual total return, that would have been a bigger drop. But since we smoothed it over 4 years, we get a little bit this year, and if things stay as predicted, it would continue to decline over several years as we phase in the rest of that gain, barring any significant losses. So again, it's a good year to report. We don't have too many years like this one. But again, everybody's going to look good. I've seen some absolutely crazy returns for endowments and foundations and things for the year ending June 30. I think like University of Virginia, for example, I'm thinking was upwards of 50%, which is their totally different investment philosophy. But again, very strong year. So just if things just hold and we can just get something close to our assumed rate of return going forward, it really bodes well for the retirement plan. So with that said, as far as changes, we really didn't change anything this year in the way we do things. We did an experience study in 2019 that we used to make some changes for the 2020 valuation. We do one every 5 years. So we'll do one at the end of the 2024 year. Again, we're amortizing the unfunded liability over 15 years since that change, the assumption changes, and any gains or losses other than that investment smoothing get amortized over a 15-year period. There are no changes in the plan provisions. The city did provide a COLA this year of 1%, which is exactly what our assumption is. So 4 or 5 years ago, we built into our funding model the assumption that you would grant a COLA each year. So it's included in the liabilities, and that's an assumption of 1%. So if you grant 1%, you really don't have a gain or loss from the cost of living adjustment because that's what's predicted. If you were to give more than that, and we might want to discuss that at some point, then obviously that creates a liability that wasn't planned for. I don't know. I've had this conversation with some other clients recently. Social Security just came out and announced next year's increase is 5.9%. So I wouldn't be surprised if HR or somebody at the city got some increase from retirees about what the cost of living adjustment for them is going to be, because a lot of them are already receiving Social Security, and that's a big increase. So I guess we'll see how that all plays out. But the 1% is built into our model, and that's what you granted last year. So there's really no gain or loss attributable to that. I'll turn it over to Bill. You want to take a few slides here and walk through some of these exhibits?
Yeah, so I'll start on membership. I'm on slide 6. I'm going to look at my hard copy here because my eyes are going bad and I can't see the screen very well. But at any rate, the total basically stayed the same. Total population from 2131 to 2134. You can see the different plans there. Of course, active plan 1 and 2 are frozen. No new employees get in those plans, so those go down every year. So you can see plan 1 was 329, plan 2 158. Plan 3 is where all the new hires go into the system, and that went up from 178 to 212. DC plan stayed relatively level. I think we're up 3 folks there. Vested terms, you're down 1 at 410, and retirees up 13. So basically, the population stayed roughly the same as it was in 2020. I will point out that we currently actually have more retirees than you do actives. I think this is the first time ever. You have 0.97 actives for each retiree, which is down from 1 3/4% in 2008. So the plan is just getting more and more mature, and that means a lot of the benefits then are actually fixed benefits, right? Because you're not going to change benefits for retirees. They get what they get. So those are fixed benefits. So the impact of adjusting cost by changing plan provisions gets a little bit less because you're only going to affect actives in that case.
Bill, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
This is David Hughes. Sorry, my video isn't working, but does that change you just mentioned have an impact on this, like what's being discussed relative to Social Security, where there are fewer people working and more people collecting?
Yeah, I think, this is an open system, just like Social Security is, right? In other words, people come in and if you hire somebody new, they get into the plan, they might get in plan 3 instead of plan 1, but they're going to be contributing to the plan. But you're right, it's a mature system, which means there are more people taking out than putting in. So of course, over time, that puts the burden on the city to fund it. Although I will say that the new employees are contributing at the highest rate, right? They're contributing 5% of pay, whereas some of the legacy older employers are contributing less than that. And for years, the employees didn't contribute at all. So you are getting member contributions now from new employees at a higher level than you are for the people that might be walking out the door. So that helps a little bit. But yeah, it's like any other, long-term plan. Fortunately for the retirees, unfortunately for the system, people are living longer, right? So we're getting more and more people out there drawing benefits, and the city payroll isn't, the covered employee base isn't really changing dramatically. So yeah, I think, it put a little bit more burden on both the city to fund it and also the investments to fund it.
And I'll also point out too, for this year, you had a slight increase. We don't have total actives on here, but at any rate, for Plan 3, where all the new employees go in, you did have an increase in Plan 3, but not as much as prior years. And we have seen, basically active employees for this year are down across all public plans because they're having trouble. People are leaving and they're having trouble refilling those positions just based on where the economy is right now. And we don't know if this is a long or short-term thing, but you could get, if we get back to sort of more normal economics, you might see the actives bump up a little bit more next year or 2 years from now, or maybe not. We'll just have to wait and see if this is a short-term or long-term thing. But I do know that public plans in general are having trouble hiring folks to replace those that left,
Hey, Bill.
especially in public safety.
A question about that. So when you all calculate our contribution rate, are you assuming that we're fully staffed when you do that?
Yes, yeah, we assume that your active population is going to stay the same. And
Yeah, in fact, when we do our projections, Jason, what we do is level it out in the future. We assume no change from normal. Okay, so we don't assume a declining population in the actives. But this year you're down a little bit. I think the total active count is 699. I don't know what it was. It's not a huge drop. Where is it? Last year it was 711. So it's only a difference of 12 people. Okay. We've seen some others where there's been a big difference. One of our clients in the public safety last year had almost 1,000 and this year had 900 because they're having a hard time filling those jobs. So that's one case where the payroll is all of a sudden down for public safety, but we don't expect it to be that way in the future. I mean, yours is not that big a difference. In Charlottesville, maybe a little bit different type of town than some of these other localities we work with, but
yeah, you're just down a little bit, not as much as some of the other public plans.
Okay.
But yes, but we do assume your active population is going to be level going forward in the projections.
does that answer your questions?
All right, Bill, go ahead, go to the next slide, 7. This is the net pension liability. This is the funded status you report on GASB 68 for the valuation year. You can see, the total pension liability, as Bill mentioned earlier, is fairly predictable. You see it goes up every year as people get pay increases and earn an additional year of salary. And, it goes up pretty predictably each year. The wild card is the fiduciary net position, which of course is market value of assets, which, that's based on market returns, which can be anything from year to year. And last year was a really good year. So you can see, the red bar, which is liability, went up a little bit from 211 to 215 million. But the blue bar went up quite a bit from 120 million to 152 million, based on that 23% return that you achieved last year. So the net pension liability, which is the unfunded, just the difference between the pension liability and the fiduciary net position, dropped from 91 million to 63.5 million. And that's the green bar there. And that's the lowest it's been since back in 2014. which I think was the first year GASB was implemented, if I remember correctly. So back there, you know, you're back to where you were in 2014, roughly.
Yeah, it's interesting. In 2015 is the year that we added the COLA assumption. So that's why the number jumped up from 2014 to 2015. That was the year we put in the 1% COLA assumption, which increased the liability. You can see the liability jump from 152 million to 176 million. Okay, because of that change. And then since then, this liability growth has been pretty darn level, right? 5 million a year or whatever. It's the assets that kind of bounce around based on the markets.
And by the way, if you were to change, you know, the discount rate, we did an experience study last year. We did not change the discount rate. We kept it at 7.5%. But just so you know, if you were to change that discount rate, and you know, we won't look at it again probably unless you ask us to until the next experience study, but a plus or minus 1% change in that discount rate would change the net pension liability approximately $22 million. If you change the discount rate higher, it gets lower, and if you lower the discount rate, the net pension liability goes up by about $22 million. Next slide. So this is assets and liabilities together. We split the pension liability out among the different statuses. So you have the active liability is 69 million. For term vests are folks that are no longer employed by the city, but they are due a benefit in the future. Those folks have a liability of 8.7 million. And then of course the retirees, it also includes disabled and survivors. It's anyone receiving monthly annuities. Liability for retirees in total is 138 million. And then you compare that to the market value of assets, the 151, and you get the funded status of 70.5%. Funded status is the blue bar, and you can see how that just shot up last year, again, primarily due to the market value of assets. And the green bar is the net pension, is the market value of assets. So, you know, those both shot up as a result of the investment return. Funded status is the highest it's been since 2008. And as we've said, assets have increased significantly. They're 66% higher assets are than they were in 2016. And then the last bullet there is retirees and terminated participants account for 68% of the total pension liability.
You're kind of getting back to that question earlier. If you look at the liability for retirees, now it's almost $140 million. Back in 08, it was only 58 million. You got almost twice as many retirees and they have higher pensions. So that's grown pretty dramatically. The other thing is you can see what happened back here in 2008, right? We did a valuation June 30 of 08 before the market crashed, right? So then when we showed back in 2019 and 2009, rather, the market had dropped the second half of 08 and the funded status dropped from 71 to 54. So it's basically taken all this time to get back to the same funded status. Although we did include that COLA assumption in the mix, right? Had we not done that, the funded status would be better now. But again, you know, over that period of time, we got back to where we started in 08, and hopefully in pretty good position for the future.
All right, go on to the next slide, Bill. So here is a graph of funded status, what Bill just mentioned. So you're up this year to 70.5, which is the highest it's been, like Bill just mentioned, since 2008. And this basically summarized what Bill just described. So you can see the big drop from 08 to 09 as a result of the market crash. And then you can see the big bump up last year due to the good year in the markets. And, you know, it kind of bounces around in between for various reasons that are highlighted.
It looks a little more volatile than it really is in the middle. I mean, the scale starts at 40. If it started at 0, this line in the middle would look a lot flatter.
Right.
But you can see how it's kind of hovered around in the 50s and 60s until this year.
On the next slide, this is rates of return. So again, the green bar is the rate of return on the market value of assets. That bounces all around like a roller coaster. It's up, it's down. Last year was up a lot, 28.7%. You can see the year before that, it was 3%, 8% the year before that. So that bounces all around. The blue line is a flatter line. That's our smooth return assets that we use to calculate the contribution rates. So that includes the 4-year smoothing method. So we're only recognizing 1/4 of last year's gains in this year's actuarial value of assets. So the blue line is a much smoother line, and that's to help for budgeting purposes, and so that the contribution rate doesn't jump up and down as quickly based on the market value of return. And like Bill said, so now we have a 4-year window, you know, barring some other big losses that eat into that. Hopefully that won't happen, where we will recognize additional gain for the next 4 years. And we'll look at that in the projections here in a little bit. And of course, the assumed rate of return has not changed during this whole time. It's been steady at 7.5%. We did look at possibly changing that with the last experience study, but decided not to. And you certainly can't argue with that rate of return based on what you've actually received. So the 5-year averages are also both over 7.5%. On market value, 5-year average is almost 13%. And even the actuarial value, which is smooth, is 8.83, almost 9%. So both of those exceed the 7.5% assumption for just looking at 5 years. All right, Bill. So
This
this
chart gets a little busy. It's got a lot of little pieces and parts on it, but we're just trying to show you the cash flow between the employer contributions, which is the blue, which have increased pretty steadily over time. In a couple of years, we've funded a little additional amount, but it's been, you know, $10 or $11 million the last couple of years. And then you've got the distributions, which is the payments to the retirees, which continue to go up. Last year it was $14 million versus, you know, 6.7 million back in 2008. So that's out the door. The employee contributions actually start showing up on the graph now. When they first started phasing in, it was the first year it was like $200,000, and now it's $1 million. So again, as each of those new employee comes in and pays 5% of pay, we expect that number is going to go up. Okay, and that's not going to change based on investment performance, right? That's going to always be 5% for those new employees, and the same contributions for the legacy and the older employees. And then the investment earnings, you know, just to show you that, you know, again, they kind of drive a lot of this. But so your ins and outs, you know, last year you put in 11 million, the employees put in $1 million, so that's 12 million, and you paid out 14 million. So you needed 2 million in investment earnings to break even. When you had 35 million. Okay, so again, shows up in all the other numbers. At some point, we might drop off a couple of years on this because it's getting kind of hard to read, but I think it's a pretty good picture to see. For those of you, I don't know how many of you have been around this whole time. I think Jason and Sarah have, but I'm not sure how many board members have.
Are those investment earnings or just an appreciation of the investments?
It's investment earnings. Yeah, last year, let me see. It's realized and unrealized appreciation and interest and dividend income. And I think last year it was, yeah, the net appreciation was 34.1 million, but that includes unrealized gains and losses as well.
Okay. So it's not actually cash.
No, it's not all cash, right? But it is appreciation. Correct.
So this slide just shows the employer contribution rates going back to 2008. So last year it did drop as a result of the investment loss from 26 down to 24.85. So that's the actuarial rate for the 2023 fiscal year. And of course, you had the big jump from 2014 to 2015. That was primarily due to the addition of the 1% COLA assumption. So the fact that you're actually pre-funding a COLA at 1% is very fiscally responsible. I believe you're the only public plan that we work with that actually does pre-fund a COLA. So that's good. And like Bill said, you're at the same funded status now that you were back in 2008, but really you're better off because that also includes the 1% COLA assumption in there, which was not in there in 2008. So even though the funded status is the same, you're really better off in terms of funding the liability and including COLAs. But you do get a little bit of a drop in the contribution rate. So this year the actuarial rate is at 26%. That's what you're collecting this year. And then 2023 will be 24.85 in terms of actuarial rate. You could budget something different, but that's the actuarial rate. Any questions on that?
I'm not sure I completely understand what this is saying. For these percentages, what is 24.85%?
That's the percent of pay that the employer needs to contribute to meet the actuarial minimum to fund the system.
So each,
You add that to the 5% that the employees are contributing, and then that's your total percent from employers and employees to fund the liability based on our valuation method.
and I don't know, I'm assuming for every pay period, the city makes a deposit into the retirement trust based on the payroll for that period, and it would be 24.8%, right, Jason?
Yeah, it's deducted. Well, it's contributed each payroll cycle. Yeah.
Any other questions on the employer contribution rates? So I will turn this back over to Bill to talk about the projections. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've done some 10-year projections, just assuming everything works according to the plan. Meaning we don't change any plan provisions. There's no change in the population. The assets return 7.5% each and every year, and payroll goes up 3%. People get raises, whatever, and nothing else happens outside of our assumption. And that the city actually funds what we ask, or what we say is the minimum, which they always have, or more. Of course, if you play it out that way, because we jumped up so much next year, we're amortizing an unfunded liability over a 15-year period, and we started 4 or 5 years ago, right? So we're really on track to get 100% funded, 10 years out. I mean, that's the plan. Of course, this can go up or down depending on investment performance, and it's not going to be a straight line, of course, because the investment performance, even if it averages 7.5% a year over a 10-year period, it's not going to be 7.5% every year. But this is sort of the plan to get to where you want to be, over a 10-year period, which it looks better than it did a few years back. It basically says we think we'll be at 80% by 2025 and 100% by 2031. Now, of course, during that time, we're going to do 2 experience studies, right? We'll look at all the assumptions, including the investment return. We may make some changes that will affect this glide path. But, at the end of the day, this is what the plan is for funding the system. So, I think it's a better story than it was 3 or 4 years ago, because last year, cures a lot of sins, and we just keep our fingers crossed that the market doesn't take back a lot of what we've already gained.
So Bill, if we're amortizing the unfunded liability over 15 years, why do we get to 100% in a shorter time period?
Well, no, I think that started 4 years ago.
No, Bill, it started last year.
There.
Yeah, no, the 15 years started last year, 2020.
Oh, right, but then we had the big gain.
Right. Okay.
See, the big gain is so large that you're gonna, if you continue to earn 7.5% a year, every year going forward, which is a big if, but if you do, last year's gain was so large that you actually meet that 15-year amortization early. Okay, but if in the future you have years that go below the 7.5, then that will move it back out to the 15 years or some other date going forward. But for this graph based on last year, if you were to continue to earn 7.5%, your gain was so large last year that you actually meet that amortization quicker than the 15 years that we are providing for it.
Yeah, I don't have last year's report in front of me, but last year we started this projection with last year's funded status, which was what, 50-some%, right? It was 56. So this chart started down here last year, and it still showed a similar trend, but it didn't get to 102. It might have got to 90 or whatever by 2031, and it really is the bump in 1 year.
Mhm. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Quick question, Bill. On the funded status, if we hit 100%, does that mean that the city no longer needs to make a contribution?
No, because people still earn benefit. What that means is the unfunded liability would be paid off. You have basically two parts of your contribution. The first part is what's called the normal cost, which is the cost of benefits that the active employees are earning each year. Each year as they work, they earn a benefit based on their pay and their service and the formula, right? So that's a cost that's ongoing, okay? But you also have an unfunded liability because you're not 100% funded, which is being amortized over 15 years. That's the 15-year mortgage. So as you pay off the mortgage, then after that, you're still going to have the normal cost accrual that you'll have to pay for, but that's a much smaller number. Actually, the normal cost for the current year based on this year's valuation is like 4.5% of pay. So basically out of that 28%, 24% of it is paying off the unfunded liability and 4.5% is paying for the benefits people earn. Plus on top of that, you're getting the employee contributions. So the benefits people earn is really worth about 9 or 10% of pay, but the employees are paying for half of it, okay? And then you're paying off the unfunded liability. So what'll happen is the contribution rates, we projected out on the next slide how they're going down. This is the rate we just calculated, right? And we talked about phasing in that gain over the next 4 years. So assuming the market holds at the 7.5, each year we're going to take a little piece of that 28% gain into the calculation. So the contribution rates will decline and then, they start to level out. But what'll happen is once you get past fully funding, that probably half of that 16% drops off, okay? Because then if you get to 100%, you don't have an unfunded liability anymore. So the contribution rate would drop significantly. But like I said before, we'll do an experience study that'll affect the results here and affect the results 5 years later. So at that time, we may look at, changing the slope of this contribution curve, right? Depending on where we stand at that point in time. But at the end of the day, I guess this assumes we get our rates of return. We're looking at a declining budget amount for the city over the next 10 years.
So Bill, this is Chrissy Hamill with the budget office. And I both love and hate this slide, to be honest with you.
Wow.
I think all the points you just made, I completely agree. But this is the perfect case scenario. And it would be really nice if there was a caveat here, because I think this sends a message that there's budget savings. And there really, there's not, because as you just said, it assumes we're going to make 7.5% returns. And additionally, this city underwent a pretty substantial change, as you recall, several years ago for sustaining the plan. And so it is really important to us to keep that message out there. And so I would love to see some kind of caveat on this chart that just says this is sort of a perfect case scenario with all the things you just
we could do that a
described.
lot of different ways. I mean, we could show a chart that says, what would this look like if, for example, we lost 10% this year and then just got 7.5% thereafter? My guess is this line would be a whole lot flatter.
Yeah.
Okay, and that could happen, right?
Yeah.
So, depending on what you want, this is what we put in the presentation, but we can certainly put some additional charts in there to show better and worse experience and how it affects that contribution rate.
Yeah, that'd be
Because you're right, I'd
great.
be a little bit concerned. I hate to have budget people take this and run with it and do a 5-year budget says we're going to be contributing 20% of pay or less, and then find out it ends up being 25. Because once you
What-
spend the money somewhere else, you can't get it back.
Yes. And you just precisely read my mind, because the budget people don't do that. But it is the other people who look at this and say, oh, well, we've got right here is a way to reduce the budget. And then they run with that. And that's not necessarily the case, or what I would think we would want to do.
Yeah, we can certainly send a chart that might throw several different scenarios on the same chart. Maybe this is the plan, but it could be flat at 25 and it could go down further if you get great experience. But I mean, that's up. I mean, Jason, decide, how many scenarios you want. We can talk about that offline and get you some additional information.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Jason, when we did the sustainability study, what was the year that we said at that point we would get to 80? And I think it's even now with this great performance, it's still pushed out. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it was like 10 to 12 years from when we did that, which was 2018, so 2028, maybe somewhere in there.
So you were saying we're going to get to 80% then probably around 2030.
Right.
Yeah, which sounds about right? Because you picked up 14% like all in 1 year last year, right? Which nobody planned for. So
Yeah, I do wonder, I was looking at, so this same slide last year showed a projected rate of 26.07 for 23.
okay.
And so now we're at 24.85. So I wonder if we sort of normalize those returns, like, hey, the rate probably should have been about 26. If we didn't have such exceptional market returns last year.
Yeah, it would have been actually. I think we actually break that down in our evaluation report, Jason. Let me look. I don't know if I have it printed out and I can't get to it. But there's a breakdown of what the contribution rate change is attributable to. How much of it's due to the investment return? I don't know, Bill, if you've got that at your fingertips or not. But you're right. I think it would have been at least 26 had we only gotten 7.5%, right?
Yeah, the decrease due to the actual asset return, this is the actual asset, the smooth was 1.75%. So you'd have to, if you got this regular 7.5%, you'd have to add 1.75 to that number, which gets you what, 26.5? Yeah, so it'd be
It sounds like what you saw in last year's projection.
it'd be
Jason.
26.5 without the asset return.
Right. And I think, for the general employee, we were at a budget of 27% for our contribution. So that's much more reasonable than setting an expectation because of 1 year's returns that we can now drop that, just under 3%.
Well, one of the things too is if you do one of the schedules you put in your financial statements is a schedule of contributions required and contributions made. So if you actually stick with 26 or 27 and the number we give you is 24, it's going to show an excess contribution. So for reporting to ratings agencies and things like that, that's a positive indicator, right?
Oh,
That you're-
yeah, absolutely. And all that, I think, we don't have an issue. It's at budget time, right? When these kind of reports are out here and we say, oh, our contribution rate is going to maintain the same rate, or it's going to be something that's different from here. And it sets a precedent that there's some budgetary savings. And sure, there could be, but it also, there also could be a big spike next year because the returns might be different. All I'm saying is if we could just manage the expectation or the storyline here, And maybe Jason's suggestion is a good one about, smoothing out the returns, or yours with providing some other options, just so that this is not presented as a definitive answer.
Right.
So maybe then just adding one line to this chart, I'm thinking out loud here. If we showed this same chart as if we only got 7.5% last year, it would start at 26.5 and it wouldn't go down like this as much, right? And maybe said, here's, had we not had the big gain, here's where we would have been. And maybe you just put 2 lines on the chart, and that way people can say, well, why don't we stick to that chart? Because we got 28 last year, we could get -10 next year, I don't know. This is something we can think about, and we can pretty much do any scenario you think makes sense. We don't want to overdo it, but I understand. That's why I said in the first intro is that we don't want to get too giddy about all this, right? Because you got this one year, you're not going to get it next year. But how different is it going to be? And
Yeah, completely agree. And especially since, we've been in a state of even a management change. Even when these reports circulate internally, it would be a little bit better to help, paint a more consistent story than big spikes, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I don't know the process and the legality of all this. Is if we replace this slide in this deck with something with additional scenarios, would that be okay? Or is this now a public document that we can't change?
So actually,
mean,
I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to take over because I'm not on the commission, but I think there's always room to add or change or amend. And I don't think, this isn't wrong. I
Right.
just think we need to be a little bit more intentional about our story here. And, the recommendation as the actuary that you make, that's the rate. But I think if you could also provide some documentation for whatever decision we decide to make on the contribution end, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and this number is the minimum required contribution to meet our obligation.
Right.
Okay, so we can discuss offline, decide whether we want to, how and when we might want to supplement this, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Good discussion. I'm going to turn this over now to Dan and Dimitri, who've been patient enough to wait. Similar story on the OPEB plans. But I'll let them take it from here. And Dan,
Thank you. Good morning from Houston, Texas.
Just tell me
90
where to
degrees
go on
yesterday.
this.
All right, let's talk about the OPEB side of the house. Just some opening commentary, and then Dimitri will work through some of the results. If you recall, when we did our last experience study, we changed, the Society of Actuaries came out with a general table for both the private sector and the public sector plans. And so we decided to go with that public sector plan table because you're just not large enough to have your own mortality study. And tied with those tables are these improvement scales. So you may see there's a slight change. Well, we changed the improvement scale from the MP 2019 to the MP 2020. Not a big deal. And then we just reset the trend assumption from last year. And here's the good news, the claims experience. For the second year in a row, your experience has been very good. And what that means is we have not gotten the expected increases or the trend that we expect. So based on that, you had an actuarial gain of approximately $6 million. In other words, your liability dropped by $6 million because of the strong or the better than expected inflation or trend on your medical rates. So you'll see that helped. And then of course, just like the pension plan, we have the strong investment return. And then there is no changes in the plan provisions. Next slide, please. And we talk about the returns. Just like the pension, now we will mention that the OPEB was 28.7, the pension was 28.6. So maybe the OPEB is a little stronger, but it's just the way we round things. So we had expected 7.5%, same as the pension. We got 28.7. So you take that $6 million gain that we got on the better than expected trend on the medical rates, and you add it to this $9.9 million gain for the assets, we're talking it's about $16 million swing in the unfunded just on those two components. And they're both in the positive direction. So as you can see, that increased your funded status from 62.8 to 82.1. So you'll see the same thing on the OPEB that you're seeing on the pension plan. And then of course, the required contribution, we were at 9.44 for fiscal 2021. It dropped to 7.68, and it's going to drop further to 4.66 for fiscal 2023. And there was an slight additional contribution to the OPEB plan this year of $246,000. Any questions with those before we move on to the results?
Yeah, Dan, I have a question on slide 17. When you say the claims experience was better than expected, is that based on actual retiree claims? Is it for the whole pool of employees? Is it the rate that we're charging the retirement fund for healthcare?
Yeah, it's the combined active and retiree group, since they're paying that rate. So it is the total experience of the plan, and it's based on the rates that you're actually from your TPA. So that's what we base our claims experience based on. So we take your claims, or sorry, we take your actual premium amounts, we match it with your actual data, and when your medical provider consultant determines the claims, so they take the claims by your population and get you a premium. Well, we reverse it. We take the premiums with your data and get claims. So we're just reversing what they do. So it's based on your actual experience for both the actives and retirees.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if this is something that is outside our control, or is it actually based on the premium rate that we're setting within the healthcare fund and saying, okay, retirement fund, you owe the healthcare fund this much, or are you actually going all the way back to the actual claim experience?
We're going back to the pure premiums.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we're self-insured, I would assume you're just using what the city is contributing. We're not getting a premium from an insurance company.
Right, we're using that total premium, which is the piece that you have for the city and the employee, and then the extra piece. So we're using the total premium.
Yeah, so that's what I was wondering, because like we're basically setting that premium rate. We have a little bit of control over it. So you're looking at that and saying, hey, that premium rate didn't change this year. We thought it was going to go up 5% or 8% or whatever, and it did not. So that's what you're saying is the gain?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions before we get into the results? If not, Dimitri? Dimitri, you there?
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute. Similar to the pension plan, there are fewer actives this year, 27 fewer actives to be exact. And we have one less retiree this year. Unlike pension plan, there are more actives than inactives, since in the OPEB plan, we don't have any terminated vested employees. Next slide, please, Bill. Fiduciary net position. If my colleagues haven't stressed it enough, the assets perform simply phenomenally. So if you look at the green bar, you'll see that the fiduciary net position, which is a fancy name for the market value of assets, went up from about $47 million to about 60. And if you look at if you compare the blue bars, you'll see that the net investment income went up from about $1.5 million to about 13.5 million. So simply phenomenal. Next slide, please. Net OPEB liability pretty much stayed the same as last year. Actually, it went down by about $1.3 million, so somewhat level. But the fiduciary net position went up. So the net OPEB liability, which is the difference between these two items, went down from about $28 million to 13. So the funding percentage went up from 63% to 82%.
And just one comment on the OPEB, we do not use any smoothing method on the assets. We use the pure market value. So everything that happens is reflected immediately. We don't defer any gains and losses on the OPEB side.
All right.
I was going to say, I struggle to think of any other locality we do work with. Maybe Dimitri and Dan, you know of one that has an 82% funded OPEB plan. A lot of employers, probably the majority, don't fund it at all. They carry this huge liability on their books with no asset. So, I mean, this is a really good story to tell. I mean, even if you were still at 40%, you'd be way above the median. Okay. So being at 82 is a pretty good story. It's also good for security for the retirees.
And why don't you use an asset smoothing on the OPEB trust for the contribution?
Because generally, historically speaking, the OPEBs were just more of a time and look at time in history. We have never historically used smoothing methods on the OPEB plan. First of all, because not many OPEB plans had assets. That wasn't until recent history. And even in corporate America, they don't have assets. So we've always used the market value for OPEB. Historically, that's what we've used. Now we could go to a smoothing method, and that's allowed under the accounting standards for the most part, but historically for the contributions, but historically we just haven't done it for OPEB plans.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, we're at $60 million in assets now. If there was, well, like we experienced this year, an increase or a decrease, it could potentially swing that contribution rate by several percentage points. I'm just wondering if, do you all think it would ever make sense to look at doing it the same way that we do the pension now that the assets are much higher?
Yeah, I'm thinking it might, Jason. We've talked about that internally on a couple of plans that are funded, and we don't smooth on any of them. I think, like Dan said, to his point, is 10 years ago, nobody was even funding these plans or whatever. But yeah, if we get to the contribution rates and you look at the history of those, if you were to smooth the assets, the drop wouldn't be nearly as significant, and maybe that would make more sense, give you a little bit of cushion for the future as well. So I don't know, Dan, if you have any more comment on that. Do we wait till the next experience study to think about that, or do we think about it now?
I'm not sure it makes sense to defer that to the next experience study, which would be 2025.
Right.
That's something we could change. I mean, we could change it for this valuation if you wanted to reflect not all that gain in 1 year. Now, unlike the pension, we didn't see a dramatic decrease in that contribution rate, but it did go down a couple percentage points.
Yeah, it's like here's the rates kind of moving along, Dan, right? This is the history of rates.
Yeah, I think, last year we were looking at a 10-year projection somewhere between 7% and 8% almost every year, and now we're like around 4%.
Correct.
So 3% of pay is a pretty significant dollar amount for us.
And even on the projection, that 4.6 is not really going anywhere.
Yeah, because we're not smoothing in the gain, right? If on the pension, it's dropping over 4 years because we're smoothing in the gain and then it's getting more level. But this drops right away because we're not smoothing in the gain. So yeah, we could look at that again from a budget, kind of the same conversation we had on the pension side, right? If you don't fiscally need to take advantage of a whole 3% drop in the contribution rate for this, and you can build a budget with a higher rate, maybe it makes more sense to smooth that in and keep that rate a little bit higher, just to protect you down the road.
I would be in favor of that. I mean, and I think that's consistent with the narrative that, you know, with what we do with the rest of our budget. We try to smooth out as much as we can without these ebbs and flows. And once you make big decreases in a budget like this, it's really hard to build them back in. And so if we really do think that these gains are an anomaly, I personally don't think it makes sense from a budgetary standpoint to jump on the bandwagon and take advantage of all of that without a little bit more of a trend.
Yeah, Chrissy, on the OPEB side, the way we do the projections on the OPEB side, you know, that 4.6 is pretty consistent, assuming you only get the 7.5 and no more big swings. But you're right, once that 3% is gone, getting it back is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So we can go ahead and look at a 5-year smooth. It will not be the same type of smoothing they do on the same calculation, but we'll look at that and see what that does for this recommended contribution rate as of 7/1/2021. So I don't see any reason to defer that unless the city feels differently. All right.
I think I
have a
skipped
quick
a slide or
question.
two, but we're probably good anyway, right? You want to look at the projections, Dan?
Quick
Yeah.
question,
Yes.
if I can, before we go on slide 20, there's an orange bar titled employee contributions. Would that really be retiree contributions, or am I not understanding that well?
Yes, it is. It's retiree contributions.
Okay, thank
The
you.
way that the statement has it has an employer and employee. So we're just matching the statement.
Thank you.
75, sorry.
So if you go to slide 22, there they are at about the same percentages.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so the one big thing, you know, when we do this 10-year projection on the OPEB plan, is just like the pension, we assume that the population is the same. But because we have the grandfather folks, we have the plan 1 and the plan 2 individuals, all of our new people coming in to remain at the current level are all plan 2 folks. And those plan 2 folks do not have a post 65 liability because they no longer have the post 65 coverage that the city is responsible for. So we're bringing in about 300 to 400 new entrants each year who are plan 2 people. So we are building a future population that will not have post 65 coverage. So the liability on average for those folks is going to be much less than the average grandfather or plan 1 retiree. So you will not see the same growth because we're basically phasing out a portion of the benefit that the current retirees have. Does that make sense on our projections? Okay, we're also assuming the same 7.5%. So you look at this, yeah, go ahead, do the next one. So this is our liability projections. And it's not growing like it has in the past because of what I just told you. Those plan 2 folks are coming in and we don't have a post 65 liability for them that no longer exists for that group. So we're getting much more level projected liability going out into the future for the next 10 years. And you see there's not much change in the retiree liability versus the active liability. Next slide. All right, so once again, we're looking at these liabilities versus assets. And you can see we're maintaining just about the same funded level. we're not really growing like on the pension side. That's the way we're doing these projections. You go to the next slide, it'll show you the actual status. So we're saying you're going to go from 82.1 to 84.9. And the reason is we do our projections on this contribution a little bit different than doing the pension. We assume because we're at 19 years on the amortization, if we keep going down, which may not be reality, which we don't like to assume, so we maintain that same amortization schedule going out. And that's why it's not growing like the pension does. Next slide. And because of that, once again, the contribution rate on our projections is not really changing. It's 4.66 to 4.41. And once again, if we go back and we do that smoothing, let's say it'll be 6.5 to maybe 6.3. So you won't see a large reduction like you see in the pension plan in terms of these projected contribution rates. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? If not, I think that might be.
Yeah, we just had a cash projection, but.
Right. So here is once again, the retirees, because we have more Plan 1 retirees going out in the future, that retiree contribution rate is going up. And we have a pretty smooth employer contribution rate. Next slide.
That's it.
Should be everything.
I guess just in summary, the news is good all around, but I think everybody, you need to use it with caution. Kind of a lot of our conversation, surrounded that. So we have a few follow-up things we'll get back with Jason, Sarah, and Chrissy on that have more to do with budget planning and things like that than commission work related to stewardship of the trusts and making sure these things are on track. I mean, that's all good news. But is there anything else we need to address, in the near term or plan for in the long term? I know, Jason, you had sent an email. You had a couple of questions about the cost of living and things like that. I don't know if we want to get into a conversation about that or not, if that's agenda item, but.
Yeah, it is an agenda item. So maybe we can make sure no one else had any questions about the report in general. And if not, we can jump on to the COLA discussion. Okay. Yeah, I think kind of the main question we had, and you mentioned it earlier, was, we're assuming that the city grant a 1% COLA. That's maybe they gave a COLA that exceeded that. How would we go about sort of calculating the cost of that change?
Yeah, I did some calculations on that just for information. So to fully fund a 1% COLA is about $1.4 million to fully fund a additional 1% COLA. So obviously you can multiply that out for 2 or 3%, but it's $1.4 million for a 1% COLA in terms of a lump sum payment. If you did want to amortize that over time, if you wanted to do it over the 15 years, because you amortize everything currently over 15 years, that would be 15-year payments of $122,000. But if you decided, because of it's a COLA and you want to have a shorter amortization period, if you were to bump that down to a 5-year amortization period, it would be $300,000 over 5 years to pay out that 1.4% COLA. And of course, we can look at any cost structure you want to do in terms of either paying it all at one time or to amortize it. As the actuary, we would prefer that if you did grant a COLA, you would pay for it all at one time, because then that doesn't affect the funded status at all. Because you got an increase in liability, but you also put in the assets to cover it, so it doesn't affect the funded status. If you do amortize it over time, the funded status will drop. And the longer you amortize it, the more it's going to drop in terms of the funded status.
Do you know a ballpark change in the funded status if it were amortized over that 15-year period that you're talking about? I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just wondering what the hit would be.
Yeah, I did the math on that, Jason. It's about 0.5%. You know, it's not a huge increase or decrease in the funded status. The other thing is, if you were to put in, using the numbers Bill just gave you, if you were to do an extra 1% and amortize it over 5 years, that raises your contribution rate about 1% of pay, which kind of gets back to the rate you had already planned on, right? Because we came up with 24.6 or 8. And I think somebody mentioned you had a budget item, you were thinking preliminary about 27. So, you know, if you did an extra 1% and funded it at 27%, that's probably sufficient to amortize over a 5-year period. So you do have some room to play. I don't know that you'd want to go as far as the 5.9% Social Security increase, because that would be a really big number. But, you know,
Of course, if you do give an additional COLA and then add the percentage, that will cover the COLA, but you're not going to cover what we talked about earlier. If the markets were to go down, you've already used that additional contribution to cover the COLA is what I mean.
Right.
So if the markets do then go down, you know, you're going to lose coverage from that because you've used that increase already for the COLA. So just, you know, keep that in mind as well.
Do you know or have, I know this is relatively new, but I'm just curious for the other pension plans. I know there are many plans who didn't give a COLA at all if they were below a certain funded status, or had different COLA policies. Do you have any indication yet what they may be doing? I'm sure everybody's going to get pressure to raise the retiree COLA given the Social Security change. And I'm just curious if you've heard or seen anything from any other pensions, if they're planning to do something or not, or.
yeah, we've had the conversation, Chris. We've got one other plan in Virginia that has an automatic COLA, and it's actually based on CPI percentages. So if CPI is up, you know, it might be like 50% of CPI with a cap, kind of like VRS is. So that's going to automatically give a higher COLA, right? And then we have quite a few others that, like you said, they don't have an automatic COLA. They haven't built it into the liability, and they look at the funded status and try to decide. The board tries to decide, you know, whether or not they want to offer a COLA. Now, in most cases, granting a COLA is really not up to the board or the commission. It's up to the city council or whatever, or the budget people. But everybody's thinking they're going to get some discussion, but I haven't had anybody react yet, and I haven't seen it happen yet, but it's probably coming. Unfortunately, I can't really tell you the answer on that. If you had an automatic COLA that's 50% up to a maximum of 3, then you'd be doing that, and it would just automatically happen. But a lot of plans don't have that because they don't want to book that liability in advance.
How difficult is it to show the impact if instead of pre-funding at 1%, we pre-funded for 1.5, or we pre-funded for 2? There's going to be some pressure. Historically, the city used to do half of whatever employees got. And that changed somewhere along the way. But in part because Social Security, and in part because 1%, if you have a small pension, is a relatively small amount. I just wondered, long-term in all these projections, if we pre-fund either 1.5 or 2. And if council decides not.
Well, I can look back on this NPL chart.
Yeah, we did that once before.
Yeah. See, from 2014 to 2015, that's when we added the 1% COLA. Okay. We might have done some other things, but most of this increase. See, most years the liability is going up about 5 million. That year it went up 24 million, which, you know, rounding it off says adding the 1% COLA added $20 million to the liability. So if you doubled it, it would add another 20 to 25 million to the liability, which then has to be amortized. So, you know, let's just say if we fast forward to 2021, and this is just kind of high level estimates, if our liability, if we added another 1% automatic COLA on top of what we already have, you know, we might have a total liability instead of 215 million, it might be 235 or 240 million, right? So your funded status would then not be 63, it would be 80s or 90. And that's the difference. And then that will all flow through to the contribution rate and everything else. So, I mean, it would make, you know, a material difference. And I think we set the 1% back when we did that because we had an inflation assumption of 2%. You know, inflation's been running really low for a long time, except for this year. And with the fact that you typically were giving retirees an increase half of what the employees got, well, if inflation was running 2, the 1% was a reasonable number. Of course, this year inflation's running 5 or 6. So this is the first time that's blown that up, right? Since we had the discussion. So at the end of the day, yeah, you could increase the assumption, but I don't think you want to increase it to more than 50% of what you might give an active employee, right?
Well, and if you change the assumption, so like if we did it as part of the pre-funding, and then, you know, we don't get a COLA, regular employees don't get a COLA, then you're stuck with that assumption in your numbers going forward unless you change it, right?
Well, except they have a big gain every year that you don't give one, right? Which helps to reduce your liability, because if we build an assumption that the retirees are going to go up 2% on $130 million of the liability, and it doesn't go up 2%, then you have a gain that shows up in the next year, and that improves your funded status. So sort of like you're planning for an advance, and you reap the gain when you don't give it. Whereas this year would be the opposite effect. If you plan for 1 and you gave 2, then you'd have a loss unless you pay for it in advance.
Right. Fair point.
I mean, it wouldn't be hard for us to tell you the impact on this year's valuation of changing the assumption to 2% from 1%. Getting back to your original question, that's not hard to do. But order of magnitude, you're probably looking about maybe a $30 million increase in the liability, and how that flows through to the contribution, I don't want to guess, but obviously that 24.8 is going to go up.
But if you pre-fund at 1.5%, it wouldn't be a huge difference.
Right, it would be half of that spread.
Right.
Right.
And so you'd still have potentially the gain, but
right.
If employees got the 3%, then retirees are pre-funded for half of that.
Right.
This is David Hughes. At the risk of sounding stupid, does the pension here for retired city employees replace Social Security?
No, they have Social Security.
Okay. That changes my view of all of this.
Why?
Well, I even wrote a note on the report prior to this meeting, you know, tying it back to Social Security and the increase in the cost of living adjustment that was announced, which was a big one because of inflation. So if retirees are participating in Social Security and they're getting that kind of cost of living adjustment there, initially I said, well, it would make some sense to have something like that here. But since people participate in both, I no longer think that.
And so those years when Social Security does nothing, I mean, this 5.9% from Social Security is an aberration.
Right.
And I'm saying at 1.5% long term, potentially that could be half of what city employees get, but it's also pre-funded at that rate. And again, if you don't use it, you have extra funding.
What has Social Security typically been? It's been around 1 to 2%. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's based on the cost of living index, which has been running what in the 2% level the last quite a few years. So I don't have the history in front of me, but hadn't been anything like 5.9.
Right, I know that hasn't happened in 40 years.
Right.
It was 0 for 3 years, 2016, 2017, 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should look at this separate from Social Security, whoever has 401ks or whatever. I mean, this is the retirement fund for the employees. I think that should be looked at as the retirement fund.
And again, that's typically an assumption we look at when we do an experience study. And the reason we kind of usually hold off on that kind of thing is because, there are a lot of other things behind the scenes in this plan. Life expectancy, disability, salary increases, all these things that go into our calculations, that every 5 years we look at them in depth to decide whether we need to tweak any of them. And some of them can be positive or negative impact on the liability. And when you start picking assumptions and changing them individually, you don't really know the whole picture. So that's one of the reasons we tend to try to look at stuff like that during an experience study, which is every 5th year. You look at the rate of return, everything. If you were going to give a higher increase this year as a one-off, I don't know that that's something that you would perpetuate, but we can look at anything you're interested in. I hate to start picking apart each assumption because, if inflation is running hot, what are wages going to do? Are you going to give higher than normal salary increases because inflation's high?
Well, and I think we have to be careful with making broad assumptions like that too, because we have a lot of things going on in our budget, in particular, a lot of discussions that have to happen with schools that could have a very big impact on our general fund budget. So I don't think we should be making an assumption. I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying in general, I don't know that the assumption can be made that we're going to see a large pay increase this year. Council has a lot of hard decisions to make, and there is one decision regarding the school budget that could potentially eat up every penny of potential growth in the general fund. So it's not a given. We can't look at it in a vacuum. So I think we have to be careful. We've got it, to your point, Bill, I think, and Al's point and Jason's questions. I think we have to get all the answers. And if there's a way to sort of have all of this in our pocket so that when we get to the table with, rolling our sleeves up and trying to balance a budget, we have these talking points so that council can then make a decision on what they want to do. But I don't think it's a given. I've been here 22 years and there have been very few years that we've gotten more than a 2% increase. So, I think the Social Security thing is great and I'm happy for everybody. It's a little bit hard for those that try to manage a pension and all these things because there's a lot of unknowns and it is very individualized based on the locality's budget.
If the 1% COLA was pre-funded starting in 2014-15, has there been a 1% COLA actually granted each year since then? Or is that just a pre-funding in case?
So if city employees got a raise, then the retirees, as Al said, have traditionally gotten half of that. We have traditionally gotten 2%. FY20, city employees got a 4% raise, but some of that was considered a merit And then some of that was considered market increases for jobs. So that was a little bit of an anomaly. But generally speaking, I don't think I shouldn't be speaking off the top of my head because all my years are running together, but I don't think we got anything in 21, or yeah, we got 2% in 21 and 2% in 22, or maybe just 22. Jason, Sarah, do you recall?
I feel like there was 1 year that there wasn't, but I can't remember.
I feel like maybe
There was no COLA last year. I mean, last valuation, 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you've exceeded 1% in any of the years since we changed that assumption.
Yeah, I know in the 2020 budget, we got a 4.17% adjustment. But again, not all of that was considered a COLA. And at that point, I think retirees got 1%. If I recall correctly.
There's definitely been a 2% since I've been on, and I'm just trying to remember when that was.
So we got 2% with the 22 budget for
I'm
sure.
sorry, I'm meaning for retirees. I thought I remember voting on that since I've been on this, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, I don't recall
No?
about retirees.
It wasn't the year we did 4%. Okay. Okay. Maybe we talked about it.
Yeah, I think the general answer is, yeah, we've basically given 1% since we adopted this assumption.
All right, so there's not money hanging around that hasn't been paid out, that if you used it, you wouldn't really be moving beyond what you've already allocated.
And the only other source that we get funding for sometimes is when there's a surplus. That there has been recommendations to council that have been approved for some of those dollars to go towards the retirement commission in different capacities.
Well, and just to be clear, those that were funded with, so we have had an extremely long history of not funding the retiree COLA. Even though it was in the appropriation and they got roughly half, or got half of what the regular employee COLA was, it was not funded. And so part of the sustainability study was to pre-fund that. And so when we came back with the year-end appropriations, those dollars were to fund COLAs that had already been granted that were not pre-funded. So as we talked about this earlier, when we started this conversation, the option is you can change your annual contribution to reflect a pre-funding, or, you know, if we want to think about doing something more than 1%, you could fund that each year at a cost of 1.4 million in cash, or whatever the other options were that were gone. Or you could do an extra 100 and what'd you say, $20,000 a year,
right,
to pre-fund, in which case if you do, and retirees only get, you know, we only get a 2% COLA as general employees and retirees only get 1%, then yeah, you would have money sort of hanging around that would not be allocated.
So Chrissy, the notion that salaries wouldn't increase, I'm interested in that. If everybody else in the world is experiencing what we're experiencing and you want to hire people, you got to pay.
Yeah, so first of all, let me just say, I'm not passing off a notion that salaries won't increase. Don't put that on me, please. But what I am saying,
what you said, though.
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that we have a very big ask from a school system. And an operational change that has to be funded of roughly $4.5 million. We don't usually see that kind of growth in the general fund from year to year. So if council decides that they are going to fund an operational change on a school budget that is more than what the school, 2, 3, 4 times more than what the schools would normally get, that decreases what we have on the operational side. So it becomes a balancing act of what we do. So all I'm saying is there's a lot of changes in play here. that council will have some hard decisions to make. And, you know, it is incumbent on the retirement commission to put forth these options and put forth these requests. But I don't think we can assume that because everything and everybody else is, you know, maybe you're going to have pay increases, that our budget can necessarily reflect that as well. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm differentiating between a COLA for retirees and paying people to work at the city.
But that all gets paid out of the same pot, right? Our and salaries get paid out of the same pot, and the COLA gets paid out of the same pot. So anywhere we increase expenses, it's using up tax revenue to pay for it. And if tax revenue doesn't substantially increase and expenditures substantially increase, then you've got a deficit.
Right. As a taxpayer here, I'm not pushing for higher taxes. I want to make that clear. Is the city at full employment now?
No, far from it.
Okay.
Safe to say no.
How do you attract people?
Oh, do not think that we don't have compensation as a top priority, and council's already allocated a significant amount of money for a very comprehensive compensation study to be done. But I don't think I have to tell you that there's just been a lot of transition, and so we need some roles to be filled before we can properly have that work done, including an HR director. But I'm telling you that it is certainly a priority of this council, and I anticipate it will be a council in the future. And that's separate from the COLA. This is like really truing up some salary differences because recruitment is a challenge, yes, for a number of reasons.
But I think also, and maybe I'm making an assumption here, David, but if part of your question is to go to, you know, do we allocate or are we considering some amount of attrition? We absolutely do. That's already built into the budget.
But I'm hoping that we're more at the bottom of that than in terms of attrition. Like, I feel like I'm hopeful that over the next year and 2 years, we're going to build up the numbers instead of seeing them further go down.
Yeah, and we're certainly not budgeting for the level of attrition that we have right now. You know, we are budgeting for a level of attrition that is of a more normal nature for several reasons. One is, to your point, we hope we're not like this forever, but then also our salaries just way lag behind. So it doesn't make sense to keep increasing the number for attrition when we're bringing in new people or having to bring in new people at higher rates. So
I've got some of that data here. In FY20, it was a 4.17, call it a cost of living adjustment, COLA, for all employees. And for FY21, there was no raise at all.
thank you. And then 22, we got 2%.
Jason, the agenda item is a COLA discussion.
Yeah, and I think that's all. We don't necessarily need to make a decision on that. I think the main goal was to get a price tag. You know, if for the budget office and for council, if they were going to grant an employee increase that exceeded 2%, and therefore sort of by default increase the retiree COLA by more than 1%, we kind of have that number now of what we would be looking at as far as what the cost would be. And so we don't need to make a decision on that today. I think we'll meet again before Chrissy needs that number. But yeah, I just wanted to get it out there and put a price tag on it. So I think we're almost out of time, unless there are any last thoughts on the COLA or any questions for Sagio.
We do need to decide if we're gonna keep the November meeting date the same or change it.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think we had discussed possibly combining the November and December meetings.
Right, is
Is
that
that
okay
still
with everybody? And should we put it in early December?
Yes, and yes.
I would support that.
That sounds good.
So either the 1st or the 8th.
Either one is good for me. What do you guys think?
I'm okay with either.
I'm okay with either.
Mhm.
Let's go with the 1st. Get it out.
Okay.
There we
I
go.
like it, Heather.
Lisa, will you send a revised invite out on that?
I surely will.
Thank you.
All right. Any other new business? All right. I don't know if there are any members from the public on the meeting or if anyone else has any other comments.
You do have a couple folks in the audience and one has raised their hand. Jason, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Chief Smith, you're on with the Retirement Commission. Go ahead.
Good morning. Just like to say this is my first meeting and I want to say thank you for the hard work that you've done. It's been a great discussion and excellent work that has been done. And I certainly appreciate the comprehensive feedback that has been provided in the ensuing discussion regarding opportunities, whether it relates to recruitment and retention, because certainly that's a priority of mine as the new fire chief here in terms of addressing the high turnover in the fire department for firefighters leaving, going to other agencies that may have a different perspective regarding pension contributions, whether it's defined benefit or defined contributions, or how specialty pay for paramedics and other hazardous materials type pay, how those factored into the long-term value for the employee being compensated, and how does it transition to a retirement value and encourage them to stay longer or stay with the Charlottesville Fire Department. So I just want to say thank you for the commentary and the good work that you're all doing.
Thank you, Chief. And there are no other hands raised right now.
Hey, Jason, it's Joe Hatter. Can we go back to new business? Sort of it touches on Chief Smith's comment. We are seeing a lot of our officers now either being recruited or seeking employment with other departments who are under the Virginia retirement system. And some officers have been told by other departments that their retirement under the defined benefits plan is portable. And reading city code, it appears that it is portable. And I've talked to Lisa briefly on this, but to what extent and what is the process? So what I'm running into is, I'm not sure, but it sounds like some are being told it's a 1-for-1 transfer. So if you do 20 years here and you transferred to DRS, that you will get those 20 years. I cannot see that that's correct. And I'm hoping that people aren't making decisions based on information that is false or just wrong. So what I'm looking for is to provide all employees, especially those in public safety, fire and police, and because it's a little different with the public safety retirement plan, but to give them some guidance, or what is the process, what is the normal transfer rate. And I think it's a case-by-case basis in talking to Lisa, and it's back and forth. And then the next question would be, is the retirement board involved in the back and forth with how much of the city's retirement plan transfers over to BRS? I don't know if this is appropriate place to do this or a venue, or if it's an individual basis, or can we get some more information? Hello?
Yeah, I don't have that. I wonder, Lisa and Sarah, maybe at our December 1st meeting, if maybe we could go over the portability agreement, how that works going from the city to VRS and from VRS to the city, just because it's something I don't think the board has ever looked at. So it might be good to have a little more information about how that process works.
Or, yeah, we can bring some information, but Joe, it is very one by one, individual situation. And any employees certainly can come to us and we can explain that. And Bill helps us as well with an actuarial calculation of that exchange. He helps us determine that with a calculation. But yeah, we can bring more to December 1st to better explain the process.
Yeah, I'm afraid, well, it's two reasons of bringing it up. First is I don't want people making decisions with not all the correct information. I want them to make informed decisions for them, themselves and their families. But the second is there's always been this, once you're in the defined benefits retirement system, that you stay here 25 years and period, that it's not portable at all. So yeah, people need to know that. And I know it's in city code. It's just, I think 3 people in the city's history has taken advantage of that. I don't know, maybe you guys know better, but anyway, it's coming up a lot here at the police department and probably at the fire department. Chief Smith may know better, but yeah, people, it's all a buzz here. So thank you guys. I appreciate, anything we can put out to everybody. I appreciate that.
No, I'll just concur because as someone who's tried to step through this myself during my time on council to understand, because I do recognize there are some benefits to our retirement system for public safety that aren't always as obvious, especially to new officers or firefighters that are coming into the system. So I definitely support like anything that we can do as an organization to make sure that we're educating specifically that sector of employees on the benefits of these benefits, so that they are making informed decisions. So I just want to echo that because it's something I'm also hearing about. And we certainly want to retain folks as much as possible right now.
So I would just say, if you hear from people, to send them to us at this point. That, rumors about how things work get spread around, but if you hear of someone trying to just make that decision, please send them to HR.
I will. And I think Steve Nick, I've asked him, he's in our administration division, and he oversees payroll division and things like that. So I've asked him to reach out. I think he was going to reach out to you, Sarah. I'm not sure, but so we can get some clarification. I think some people are getting ready to make some decisions without all the information, and I just don't want to see them do that. That's all.
Hey, Joe?
Yes, sir.
What's the issue again?
So the city has a very good defined benefits public safety plan for, throughout the city, really. But it's especially good in the city of Charlottesville for a public safety worker who stays here 25 years. And it's not widely known that some of that may be portable to another retirement system, such as I think we have an agreement with VRS, our Virginia retirement system. And I think officers are being told that it's basically your whole retirement transfers directly over to VRS. And I just don't believe that's true. I just can't see how that's true. And I think officers are being told otherwise, and they're making decisions to leave based on that. So I'm just trying to get them information. David.
All right, anything else?
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Well, do we have a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Scott, second. David?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Yep.
Bye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Good job.
Thank you, everybody.
You.
Thank you.